They laughed before Hannah Okafor played a single note. The magnificent grand ballroom of Hannah State glittered beneath towering crystal chandeliers as Korea's wealthiest families gathered for the annual Han Foundation charity gala. Cameras flashed. Politicians smiled for reporters. Business leaders exchanged polished greetings. For Hannah, none of it mattered. She had crossed half the world carrying only her violin, hoping that one performance would earn enough money to save the children's music school she had built back home in Nigeria. She had been invited because an anonymous donor insisted she perform. No one told her who that donor was. As whispers spread through the ballroom, a wealthy guest glanced toward Hannah's modest dress and quietly chuckled. Another joined him. Soon several tables were smiling. Someone muttered that the entertainment budget must have been unusually small this year. Hannah heard every word. Still, she gently adjusted the violin beneath her chin and smiled with remarkable dignity. Across the ballroom, Chairman Seo Junkai entered without announcement. The conversations faded almost instantly. Publicly, he was the admired chairman of Han Group. Privately, influential people whispered another title. The Korean Mafia boss. He acknowledged no applause. His calm eyes moved slowly across the room before resting for only a brief moment on the young violinist. Then he continued walking as though nothing unusual had happened. Nobody noticed that his personal secretary quietly slipped an old envelope into Chairman Seo's jacket pocket. Nobody except Lady Kim Sun-hee. The elderly woman lowered her eyes. For nearly 30 years, she had protected one promise. Tonight, that promise was finally coming home. The master of ceremonies welcomed everyone before introducing Hannah. Polite applause echoed through the ballroom. As Hannah stepped toward the center stage, one executive leaned toward another and whispered loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "She looks completely out of place." Soft laughter followed. Hannah closed her eyes. Instead of anger, she remembered the smiling faces of the children waiting for her thousands of miles away. She raised the violin. The first note floated through the ballroom with breathtaking beauty. Every conversation stopped. Even the servers paused where they stood. The melody carried sorrow, courage, hope, and quiet resilience all at once. Chairman Seo slowly turned toward the stage. For the first time that evening, genuine emotion crossed his normally controlled expression. Because he recognized the song. It was a melody that should have disappeared decades ago. Yet someone else recognized it too. Lady Kim's hands began trembling. Tears gathered in her eyes as forgotten memories rushed back. But before anyone could understand why, the ballroom doors suddenly opened once again. A distinguished foreign diplomat entered carrying a sealed wooden case. He walked directly toward Chairman Seo. The room fell completely silent. The diplomat bowed respectfully before Chairman Seo and placed the sealed wooden case upon the marble table without saying a word. Every eye followed the exchange. Chairman Seo examined the unfamiliar crest carved into the polished wood. It was neither Korean nor Japanese. Instead, it bore an African emblem that only a handful of people in the room recognized. "You asked that this be delivered only when the melody was heard again," the diplomat said quietly. Chairman Seo nodded once. "I understand." The room buzzed with whispers. What melody? What case? Why had one violin performance changed the atmosphere of the entire gala? Hannah remained standing on the stage, uncertain whether to continue playing. Chairman Seo looked toward her. "Please," he said calmly, "finish the piece." His voice carried through the ballroom with effortless authority. No one questioned him. Hannah drew a steady breath and resumed the performance. The second movement was even more powerful than the first. The music seemed to tell the story of two families separated by oceans, united only by hope and an unbreakable promise. Guests who had laughed only minutes earlier now found themselves wiping tears from their eyes. One elderly businessman quietly removed his glasses. A young journalist stopped taking photographs altogether. Even members of the Han estate security team stood motionless, listening. When the final note faded into silence, the ballroom remained perfectly still. Then slowly, Chairman Seo began to applaud, one clap, then another. Within seconds, hundreds of guests rose to their feet. The standing ovation continued for nearly a full minute. Hannah lowered her head, overwhelmed. She had expected polite applause at best. Instead, she had earned the respect of the most influential people in the room. Yet the greatest surprise was still waiting. Chairman Seo picked up the sealed wooden case and opened it carefully. Inside rested an aged violin bow wrapped in deep blue silk. Beneath it lay several yellowed letters and a faded black and white photograph. Lady Kim gasped. "It still exists." Chairman Seo unfolded the photograph. It showed a much younger Korean couple standing beside an African family in front of a modest music school. One of the Korean men looked remarkably like Chairman Seo's late father. The little girl standing between the two families wore tiny braids and held a child's violin. Chairman Seo looked from the photograph to Hannah. "Hannah," he asked gently, "may I see the necklace you always wear?" Confused, she touched the small silver pendant around her neck. "My mother told me never to remove it. Would you allow me to examine it?" She hesitated only briefly before handing it to him. Chairman Seo opened the pendant. Hidden inside was another faded photograph, no larger than a postage stamp. The ballroom fell silent once again. The tiny image matched the larger photograph perfectly. Only one face had been folded inward for protection. Lady Kim covered her mouth. "My goodness!" One ambitious executive suddenly laughed nervously. "This must be some coincidence." Chairman Seo did not respond. Instead, he removed one of the letters from the wooden case. Its paper had grown fragile with age. The signature at the bottom belonged to his father. He read aloud, "If our families are ever separated, the child carrying the silver pendant will always have a home under the Han family name. This promise is not based on business, but on gratitude, honor, and family." A wave of astonishment swept across the ballroom. The anonymous donor had not invited Hannah by accident. Someone had been searching for her for years. Chairman Seo folded the letter carefully. "My father made very few promises," he said quietly. "But he never broke one." Across the room, the same guests who had mocked Hannah moments earlier could no longer meet her eyes. The room had shifted. The woman they had dismissed as an outsider was suddenly connected to one of the most respected families in the country, through a promise older than many of the people present. But one question remained unanswered. Who had spent decades protecting that promise, and why had tonight been chosen to reveal it? Lady Kim slowly stepped forward, her hands trembling as she looked first at the photograph, then at Hannah. "I've waited 27 years to meet you," she whispered. The ballroom was so quiet that every word echoed beneath the chandeliers. Hannah frowned in confusion. "You know me?" Lady Kim smiled through tears. "I knew your mother." A murmur spread across the guests. Chairman Seo remained silent, allowing the elderly woman to speak. "Years ago," Lady Kim began, "your mother saved my husband's life during a humanitarian mission in Lagos. He was seriously injured, far from home, and surrounded by strangers. Everyone else fled during the unrest, except your mother." Hannah's eyes widened. "My mother never told me that." "She wouldn't have," Lady Kim replied softly. "She believed kindness should never be traded for recognition." Several guests lowered their heads, remembering how they had judged Hannah before learning anything about her. Lady Kim continued, "My husband wanted to repay her, but your mother refused every gift. Finally, Chairman Seo's father made only one promise." She looked toward the faded letter. "If your family ever needed help, ours would answer." Chairman Seo nodded. "My father kept copies of every promise he ever made." He carefully unfolded another document from the wooden case. Unlike the first, this one carried official seals. It established a charitable trust that had quietly accumulated investments for decades. The beneficiary's name had been left incomplete. Only two identifying details appeared: a silver pendant, a melody known only to both families. Gasps filled the room. The anonymous donor had not been searching for just anyone. Only the rightful heir could claim the promise. One of the executives who had mocked Hannah earlier forced a nervous smile. Surely there must be additional verification. Before anyone could answer, the Han Group's family lawyer stepped forward. He had remained silent throughout the evening. "I completed that verification 3 weeks ago." The executive froze. "The records are authentic." The lawyer produced immigration documents, archived correspondence, and photographs recovered from both Korean and Nigerian archives. Each piece connected perfectly. There was no doubt the promise had found its rightful recipient. Hannah looked overwhelmed. "I didn't come here for money." "I know," Chairman Seo answered. That's exactly why my father would have wanted you to receive it. His calm voice carried no hint of obligation, only respect. Lady Kim reached into her handbag and removed a worn leather notebook. I've carried this every day. Inside were handwritten journal entries describing Hannah's parents. There were photographs of children learning music beneath a tin roof, letters thanking donors. Sketches of violins, receipts showing that Hannah's mother repeatedly redirected financial gifts to orphanages instead of herself. The room grew increasingly emotional. A young reporter quietly lowered her camera. Some moments deserved witnessing rather than recording. Chairman CEO gently closed the notebook. Your parents changed lives without asking for recognition. He paused. Tonight, their kindness returns home. At those words, the guests who had ridiculed Hannah began approaching one by one. The first was the businessman who had laughed at her dress. He bowed deeply. I owe you an apology. Another followed, then another. Soon a line formed across the ballroom. No one had instructed them to apologize. No one needed to. They had witnessed enough. Hannah accepted each apology with quiet grace. I hope, she said softly, that next time you meet someone who seems out of place, you'll first wonder what story brought them there. The words settled heavily over the room. Even Chairman CEO's security chief allowed himself the faintest smile. Yet as peace finally seemed to settle over the evening, Chairman CEO's personal secretary hurried across the ballroom. His expression had changed completely. He leaned close and whispered something into Chairman CEO's ear. For the first time all night, Chairman CEO's composed expression hardened. Someone had attempted to access the trust only hours before the gala. Whoever it was had known the promise existed, and they were still somewhere inside Hannah's state. Chairman CEO did not react with panic. He simply folded the letter, handed it back to the family lawyer, and looked toward the head of security. Lock every entrance, he said calmly. Within seconds, discreetly dressed security officers moved through the ballroom. There were no raised voices and no visible weapons. Guests only noticed that the grand doors quietly closed and that no one was being allowed to leave. The atmosphere shifted from celebration to mystery. A few nervous conversations began. What is happening? Has something been stolen? Chairman CEO addressed the room with the same composed authority that had earned him the respect of everyone present. Please remain calm. This is a precaution. We have reason to believe someone attempted to interfere with a family trust that has been protected for many years. No one is being accused. We simply need the truth. His measured tone eased the tension, but curiosity spread even faster. Hannah looked at him. Is this because of me? It is because someone broke trust, he replied. Not because of you. The family lawyer placed a slim tablet on the marble table. Our cybersecurity team detected an unauthorized attempt to access the trust records this afternoon. The intruder couldn't alter the documents, but they searched for one name. He turned the screen toward Chairman CEO. The search history contained only 3 words, silver pendant beneficiary. Lady Kim's face turned pale. They knew, Chairman CEO nodded. They knew enough to search, but not enough to find her. The security chief approached quietly. Chairman, every guest has been accounted for except one. Who? The event coordinator. Several guests exchanged confused glances. The coordinator left 10 minutes before your announcement. Chairman CEO frowned. No. Everyone looked toward him. He didn't leave. The room fell silent. Chairman CEO slowly scanned the ballroom before his eyes settled on a man standing beside one of the floral arrangements. The man was wearing a catering uniform. He kept his head lowered. Chairman CEO spoke without raising his voice. You've been carrying that serving tray for nearly 20 minutes. The man's shoulders stiffened. No waiter carries an empty tray for that long. Every head turned. The disguised man suddenly dropped the tray and sprinted toward the side exit. Before he reached the doors, 2 members of Hannah State Security stepped directly into his path. They didn't strike him. They simply blocked every route until he stopped running. Realizing escape was impossible, the man slowly raised his hands. Chairman CEO approached. You've had many opportunities to tell the truth. The man looked down. I never wanted to hurt anyone. Then why search for the trust? His voice cracked. My employer promised me enough money to erase every debt my family has. And who is your employer? The man hesitated. Chairman CEO remained silent. The quiet was more powerful than pressure. Finally, the man reached into his jacket and removed a folded business card. The family lawyer opened it. Several executives gasped. The card belonged to the chairman of a rival international investment firm that had unsuccessfully tried to acquire Han Foundation assets for years. They believed the trust contained access to charitable properties, the man admitted. They wanted control before the rightful heir appeared. So this was never about money alone, Lady Kim whispered. It was about influence. Chairman Seo looked toward Hannah. They underestimated something. What? They assumed a promise could be purchased. He turned back to the room. My father taught me that the value of a promise is measured by the years you're willing to protect it. The security chief escorted the man away peacefully to await the authorities. No applause followed, only thoughtful silence. After several moments, Hannah stepped toward Chairman Seo. I don't know how to thank you, he smiled faintly. You already have, she looked puzzled. When you chose dignity over anger. Lady Kim closed the old photo album and gently placed it into Hannah's hands. It belongs with your family now. Tears filled Hannah's eyes as she carefully turned the worn pages. Near the back, she found one final envelope addressed in her mother's handwriting. It had never been opened. With trembling fingers, she unfolded the letter. My dearest Hannah, if you are reading this, it means kindness has found its way back to you. Never measure your worth by how loudly people applaud or how quickly they judge. The people who truly see your heart will arrive exactly when they are meant to. Hannah could no longer hold back her tears. The ballroom had witnessed many grand speeches over the years. None carried the quiet power of those simple words. The musicians quietly returned to the stage, but no one reached for an instrument. No one wanted to interrupt the moment. Hannah folded her mother's letter with extraordinary care and slipped it back into the envelope before placing it inside the silver pendant she had carried her entire life. For years she had believed the pendant was simply her mother's keepsake. Now she understood it had also been a promise, patiently waiting for the right time. Chairman Seo looked across the ballroom. The gala is not over, he said. It has only become more meaningful. The guests returned to their seats, but the atmosphere had completely transformed. The laughter that had once been directed at Hannah was gone. In its place was genuine respect. The chairman of Han Foundation rose from his table. With Chairman Seo's permission, I would like to make an announcement. Seo nodded. The Han Foundation will fully restore the music academy founded by Hannah Akaffer's parents. Applause echoed throughout the ballroom. And he continued, smiling toward Hannah. We will establish scholarship programs connecting young musicians from Nigeria and Korea, ensuring that kindness travels farther than borders ever could. The applause grew even louder. Several guests stood once again. This time they were not celebrating wealth or influence. They were celebrating generosity. Hannah was speechless. I dreamed of saving one school, she whispered. You've helped save hundreds of dreams, Chairman Seo answered gently. Your parents began that work long ago. We are only keeping our promise. Lady Kim smiled warmly. They would be proud of both of you. As the evening drew to a close, many guests approached Hannah not because of the trust or the inheritance, but because they wanted to hear about the children she taught. She showed them photographs on her phone, children laughing with worn violins, tiny classrooms filled with handmade music stands, simple concerts beneath open skies. One by one, guests pledged donations, instruments, and volunteer support. By the end of the evening, enough commitments had been made to build not only one new academy, but several. What had begun with humiliation had ended in hope. Outside, a gentle rain had begun to fall over Seoul. The marble steps of Hannah State shimmered beneath the lights. Hannah stood beneath the entrance canopy preparing to leave. Chairman Seo joined her. For a few moments neither spoke. Finally, Hannah smiled. My mother always believed that music could introduce strangers before words ever could. Chairman Seo looked toward the quiet rain. I think she was right, she laughed softly. So do I, he handed her a small velvet box. Inside rested the restored violin bow from the wooden case. It belongs with the melody. She looked up in surprise. I can't accept something so valuable. You already have, he smiled. It was never ours to keep. Their eyes met with quiet understanding. There was no dramatic declaration, no hurried romance. Only mutual respect, gratitude, and the comforting certainty that this would not be their last meeting. Sometimes the strongest connections begin not with grand promises, but by faithfully honoring old ones. Months later, children in Lagos celebrated the opening of the newly rebuilt music academy. A bronze plaque stood near the entrance. It read, "Kindness never disappears. It simply waits for the right moment to return." Inside the academy hung the faded photograph that had once silenced an entire ballroom. Visitors often asked why such an ordinary picture was displayed so prominently. The teachers always gave the same answer. Because this photograph reminds us that you should never judge someone's value before learning their story. And somewhere in Seoul, whenever Chairman Seo heard a violin carried through the evening air, he paused for just a moment. Not because it reminded him of power, but because it reminded him that his father's greatest legacy had never been influence. It had been a promise faithfully kept. As this story comes to an end, remember that true strength is not measured by status, wealth, or the opinions of strangers. It is revealed through kindness, integrity, and the courage to keep your promises even when no one is watching. Thank you for spending your time with Mafia Love Chronicles. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, subscribe for more emotional Korean mafia boss stories, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear which moment moved you the most. Share this story with someone who believes that compassion, loyalty, and honor can change lives. Until the next Mafia Love Chronicles story. Remember, the greatest crowns are earned, never worn. Stay kind, stay strong, and we'll see you in the next story.